Welcome to the Leadership Variations Unfiltered podcast, where each limited run series tackles the leadership problems no one is naming, how women in STEM actually succeed, why leadership fads always fail, and where talent strategy breaks down when the stakes are the highest. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. I'm Amy Bladen Shatto, leadership consultant and coach to women in STEM, and your host of the Leadership Variations Unfiltered podcast. In this first limited series, Cracking the Code from Underestimated to Undeniable, we spotlight women leaders in STEM who have risen to senior roles, often without the recognition that they so well deserve. Today's guest I'm so happy to have is Pilar Baltar, who is a Perplexity AI business fellow and a former colleague of mine from Avanade, who I'm thrilled to reconnect with today. She is participating in a selective professional program that equips experienced business leaders with practical AI leadership skills and strategic frameworks for real-world deployment. This is so exciting to me. This fellowship brings together seasoned executives from diverse geographical backgrounds to bridge the gap between groundbreaking AI research and practical business application, gaining firsthand insight from AI leading CEOs from companies like NVIDIA, Databricks, and Box. With over 20 years of experience leading tech transformation across EMEA and US, Pilar has held senior executive roles with P&L accountability ranging from 190 million pounds to 2.3 billion euros at organizations including Microsoft partners, DXS, and Avanade. She is passionate about how AI is fundamentally reshaping business strategy and delivery models, particularly in helping organizations move beyond trend following to strategic, ethical AI adoption that drives sustainable competitive advantage. She is keen to unlock the 100% potential of AI for herself and others, as I am. Wow, what an amazing background and how interesting. We are so excited to have you today. Ready to jump into our interview here?
Go ahead, and thank you for having me.
We're so thrilled. So let's start out where you are now. When I coach women in STEM, I have found some of the most powerful parts of someone's leadership aren't on your very interesting and exhaustive resume. So tell me about your leadership today, and you're doing something so interesting with your AI background on the cutting edge. Tell me about something you've built or influenced that others may not see from the outside. You have a really great background.
That's a really interesting one. So I have a very unusual background for technology because I went to technology I'm an English major. I was very, very keen to study computational linguistics. And the only path I could find at the time was to do an English major and then select the courses that had some element of machine learning translation or computational linguistics at the time. And I did that to PhD level. Then I didn't finish. I'm a PhD dropout. I didn't read my thesis because I realized that I enjoy impacting the real world far too much. And to be fair, at the time, there wasn't enough investment on computational linguistics or natural language processing because these things go in waves. So I went into tech consulting. And something I've learned in tech consulting is that you always want to be with the technology that's cutting edge. Because A, it's more fun. I started doing a lot of work in program leadership, and they're creating a project or a program path for something that you genuinely don't know how you're going to deliver. Where you're sitting with your product owner, your architect, and you just go like, okay, we need to have at least a plan B or a plan C because this is something that no one's ever done before. Those are the really fun ones. Something that I think is unusual with that background is that I've always been kind of like a translator. And if I think of the first part of my career, it was very much translating. I was always translating between business and technology, between people from different countries, different markets, because what works in market A doesn't work in market B. And the technology is the same. What changes is the expectation, the use case, the expectation about privacy, for instance, in the States and Germany. They're like on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And to me, what was really fascinating is I'm a translator at heart. So it was like seeing how can I translate those needs so that people can focus on the business outcomes and the common good that will come out of this, the benefits of the technology. Because very often when you're working on technology projects, people focus a lot on the technology. they get enamored with the technology and then they forget about humans need to use it. It needs to be usable. It needs to be well designed. And it needs to fit the purpose that people are expecting to get out of that. So in terms of what I've built recently, I'm working right now. I got access to Comet, which is Perplexity's browser. And it's a buy-and-bite browser for now, like a week ago. And I've been testing it. I'm very happy because there are very few people who got invites. It's as popular, I think, as Gmail was back in the day where everybody's asking for invites of someone. Do you have any invite left? And I have to be clear, I don't. But what I'm doing with that is I'm part of the careers work stream leadership in the fellowship. And I'm trying to do something that I think is interesting, but not many people might have seen. With AI, the market of job search is starting to unravel for both the companies and the candidates. Because now you can go into any large language model and ask to create an amazing CV. It doesn't need to be true, but it sounds amazing. So you can go in there and very quickly, you've created in less than an hour, you can create a custom resume, a custom cover letter that could be true or not true, but it sounds plausible, and send it to 100 different applications. So what does it happen? That every time you open a job position, you might have 500 to 1,000 to thousands of people sending you CVs, and you don't really know whether what they're telling you it's true or not. It could be a hallucination. It could be a major exaggeration. You don't know. So the market is starting to become really weird now. So when people are looking for roles now, they are finding themselves in a bizarre position when there's a lot of competition for people who maybe don't have the experience. The hiring managers now are starting to flip the interviews. We're starting to see things like proctored interviews because they don't want people to use AI, or they want them to be transparent about the use of AI. So until pretty recently, Anthropic, who is a major frontier AI company, did not allow applicants to use AI in the application. And the rationale was look, we want to know how do you think. And then they changed recently. And what they have done is that they've created a guidebook of where it's okay to use AI and where it's not okay to use AI and how. So it's really interesting because you have these dynamics that's completely changing. And something that I'm testing now with partnership and some of my mentees is how can you actually use AI or an AI native search to do a search that's based on, look, this is my CV, this is my experience, this is the space I'm interested in, this is who I am, and do a search and surface maybe roles I would not consider. Because very often when we look for a role, we tend to look for a role that we had maybe just like the last one we had, but you're not really looking at the ecosystem of jobs where potentially you have some transversal skills, maybe an industry that you haven't considered, but where there are lots of open positions and your skills and your experience really match and add value. And that's something that typically when that happens, it's typically a search consultant or a headhunter that's looking and they go you have adjacent skills. Why don't you consider these? And I'm thinking could we do it with a different way of doing search? So that's what I'm exploring. I'm building a little product. One of the cool things about AI is that non-coders like me can build their own apps, their own little products. And that's fantastic.
I'm so curious. Do you think that'll change the way resumes are used? You just told me what hallucination is. And I was asking you a little bit before about how AI makes up things. And that's the word hallucination, which I didn't know. So if these resumes, AI made up resumes, or it makes it up, how does the actual company, when they get these 500 resumes, know what's real and what's just 499 made up resumes and they all look the same? Will that change the use, do you think, of resumes in the future for finding out really qualified applicants?
I think so. I think it's starting to change. And obviously you have different components. So there are certain roles that are impacted earlier. So we know, for instance, that for software developers, the way companies used to do the interviews for software developers was, look, I'm going to give you a complex coding problem and you need to solve it for me. And now if people can use AI assistants that are indetectable and ask the questions and then solve it. So yes, you are testing that someone's really good at using AI to solve the problems that you give them. But ultimately, there's that aspect of are you really going to be someone that has the experience, or are you just using AI to show me that you have the experience? And the question is, do you value the experience and the cycles of the person, not just the ability to solve that exam question? And I think it's going to change the interview. So what we're seeing is they're flipping the interview. So I was at a meeting with talent leaders for high growth companies in London, and most of them are in tech or in some form of tech or AI. Something that they're doing, for instance, is they're flipping the order of the interviews, and they are starting to do the hard interviews first. The ones that you cannot easily, the ones that require human judgment, human experience.
That's interesting.
The ones that require knowing how to assess, like if you're a software developer, it's not really about coding or how fast can you get to this problem, but what ships well, what is maintainable, what gives the capacity or the satisfaction that we want to give to the customers. So they're really flipping the order. So they do that one first, and then they will do the other two because they can clear up the filter. Some companies are going like, look, AI is here to stay. So we really want to know how you use AI. So they are very clear, and they've created a very interesting model, a matrix, where they say this is the maturity of use of AI that we see in different functions. So if you're a lawyer, this is where you could be, for instance, and they have a maturity matrix. And we are interested in someone who's like up here in the maturity. So we are even willing and happy to invest in training you and giving you, as a candidate, AI fluency so that you can show us how you would do it. But don't come here and be the lawyer that says, no, I don't want to use AI at all.
Interesting.
So you're seeing different levels of maturity in the company depending on where they are. AI native companies want to see how you use AI regardless of what your role is. It's not just for techie people. And the other companies, I think that the resume as an object, I think, is fundamentally going to change. Part of it was started already with the skills drive based, that I think we've seen that with LinkedIn, we've seen that in Microsoft and some other companies, where we look at skills rather than experience. What that will mean for university graduates and educational elites remains to be seen, because we just have this ROPA where, if you have a degree from this university, we know there are certain things that have happened to you. We know you have like a certain amount of intellectual horsepower. You are able to stay the course, and you're able to be consistent and achieve your goals, etc. Now, I think we're going to focus more on actual skills and what they mean, and not just the hard skills, but also the soft skills. Fundamentally, what is it that makes a difference? What needs a human? What still needs a human versus what you can replicate easily with an AI? And it's an uncomfortable thing for people, because when they hear this, very often what they hear is like, oh, it's coming after my work. And I'm like, well, no, it's going after some of your tasks. And very often it's tasks that you might like or not like, but your job is not the tasks. It's the outcomes. And if you can get to the outcome faster, and that requires judgment, that requires accountability, human accountability, because even if we could get AI to do a doctor's job, and sometimes they can do a pretty good job at that in some areas of medicine, no one wants to have a medical decision be made by a machine. Because if something goes wrong, who is accountable? Is the computer maker? Is it the programmer? The software maker? Who do you go after? Ultimately, you need a person to be accountable for decisions on things that have a big impact on people.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to shift gears here. Let's talk about leadership. You've had a number of different roles. You're deeply involved still in technical aspects, and you're doing absolutely groundbreaking things that to me are just fascinating. But I'd love to know a little bit about some of the roles where you were leading others. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me where you had to sort of make that, I don't know if it was a shift, but the addition of being not just working on the tech, but also being a player coach. So you were leading others who also were doing this deep technical expertise. Can you tell me about some of that shift and about your leadership style and some of the challenges that you found maybe early on when you first made that shift? What was that like for you? I find it's very different in the STEM industries than in other places.
I think for me, the company did it by design. So I was a high potential. I was in program leadership, and I had been an SME, subject matter expert in the area where I was doing the program recovery. So I got offered okay, you can get this new role. We're going to be doing like an amazing build out investment. initiative and we want you to take on, and we're going to give you cybersecurity. And I'm like, what? And I don't know anything about cybersecurity. And like, yes, that's why we give it to you, Pilar. And I'm like, what do you mean by this? It's like, well, because we want you to learn how to be a program manager, a program director.
Wow.
Or something that you're not an expert on. Because then you will focus on the leadership, being a leader of leaders, being a business leader aspect of things, and not try to do the work yourself, because that's what, one of the stations when you're a technical person, at some point you need to make that decision. I give up my technical knowledge so that I'm not going to be staying as current as I was, but now I need to focus on leadership and being a P&L leader, etc. So that was weird at the time. And I was rather young when that happened, but it was really useful because I remember my first program I took my program very happy here's the program for the first, and he's like, okay, he took a red pen and he literally crossed over any activity that had my name on it. And I was so happy because I had found things I could still do, like governance, and he's like, no, you need to find a person to do this. Your job is to manage. Your job is to be a leader here. And I don't want you to see deliverables next to your name because that means you're not leading. And that stayed with me because obviously it was a very extreme case, but it's something that sometimes you need to learn, that you deliver through others. And when you come from a background where you're like a high performer, where you really enjoy the technical side of what you do. And by the way, when I talk about technical, it can be technical as in tech, or it can be like I am a highly skilled lawyer. I still want to do the reviews, or I'm a general counsel. There's that step game where you need to deliver through others. And that to me is actually fascinating to see when people like make that switch, because for many you still miss and you go like, well, you get to do all these fun things I really love, like being in front of clients, doing this. And, you need to I find for me, the switch really changed when I started finding joy in delivering through others.
And what was that? Did it have an identity switch for you? Was there a need to make that switch in your head?
I think it came when I realized how because for me it was about impact. And, when you're a bit of a completer finisher, doing things yourself is really satisfying. You cross them off and it's like, I've done it. And I got to the point when you rely on delivering through others. The part that gives you joy really is seeing how you build people up. And that takes time. It's not something that's going. So sometimes I talk about the idea of cycles, because you need to go through a cycle to see like how the person has gone. And obviously then you have moments where someone reaches out of the blue and they go like, look, I've been thinking about that, when you were my mentor, you gave me this feedback 5 years ago. And, I just wanted to tell you it meant a lot and it helped me through the movement. And those moments are precious, but they happen typically very late. People don't often tell their leaders that they're doing a great job because they don't want to be sucking up.
Right.
And it takes time for you to realize, look, I see the impact of what I did in this person and how much happier and how much stronger they are now. And it's amazing. I think that's the best part. It did change my identity, because when you get to define yourself as a leader of leaders, which is kind of like the way I look at it, it also comes with a very heavy responsibility. And I think that's the two sides of it. You need to be looking at, how do I orchestrate and design a space that allows people to be themselves. And in some cases, it requires a cultural change, not just for you, but also for others. So if you go to a place that's very command and control, and that's not your style, you need to start creating a system where people will be, instead of coming to you and say, well, what do you think about this? They will do what would Pilar do? And then just go do it. And then I want them to not even think about that and just do it themselves. But very often when someone comes from that command and control function, they typically want to see what the leader wants. And you need to create that self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. And it takes a while. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so here's one for you. What kinds of challenges have you faced specifically as a woman in an industry that's very dominated, or has been at least for a long time dominated by men? Are there moments where gender has played a role in how you were perceived or how you led, and how have you dealt with that?
I kind of I'm a very weird person in that sense. Not weird, I mean unusual, because I've only started to notice this when I got to executive positions. So I was always the only woman in the room, and the youngest person in the room for most of my career.
A double.
And it kind of like the first time I had people that were like 30 years older than me and incredibly experienced. And I was I was the program manager. And I'm like, they're all like people I learned so much from. But I think it always worked very well for me when I was younger, because what really drives me is learning. So being surrounded by people that are smarter and more experienced than me is like my ideal scenario. And when I got to the point where I became an executive, what I started noticing is that behaviors that were part of what I normally do and who I am, and that, objectively were no different from what someone having my role and just happening to have been born a male would have done in the same circumstance, would be read and received in a different way.
Absolutely.
And that was really odd. Like, when you go like, okay, why did I get this reaction for doing my job when I didn't get that reaction before? And I think it took me a while to realize that when women have positions of perceived power, there's also an expectation that intent is not always positive. It's really bugged me for like a while. And it took a book to understand that. I don't know if I have it around here, but it's an amazing book. It's called The Likable Badass.
Nice.
And it's a book by a professor. I'll send you the reference.
Okay.
And it really helped me understand through science, and she's done a lot of research, why that happens and what women can do about it. It really, I was like, look, there was definitely no bad intention on my end, but it's perceived as if it's a criticism. Whereas I know if it came from a guy, it would be seen as just doing his job.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, is something that is difficult to escape for women in technology. And I had seen it with other female leaders, but maybe when I was younger, I didn't recognize it. Maybe I put it down to personalities or people not having the right fit with each other. But then I started to see a pattern.
How have you overcome this for yourself?
So what I've learned about it is so basically I know the space when it's likely to happen, which is very specific. And what I do is when that happens, you need to double down on your care, on the aspects, because what we tend to do is when you want to be seen as like, I'm efficient, I'm focused, I want to do this, you tend to shut down your care aspect and it's not about, it always drove me mad when people told I don't think everybody your object is not to be liked. You're not money or pizza. You're not going to be universally loved. But the idea is that, for women, you tend to do this. You want to be seen as, okay, I'm focused. This is serious. This is business. You shut down your nice side so that you can show your gravitas or your, I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And that's a mistake. You need to double down. So if you go up on your gravitas, you need to go up on your niceness.
Nice. Okay. That makes total sense, because I think the perception of women, just like you're saying, is that we are softer. We're too emotional. So the same exact thing can be said by a man, and he's perceived as, just telling it and giving us the perception and giving it the way it is. But if a woman says the exact same thing in the exact same way, she's perceived as, female, emotional. He's perceived as passionate. She's perceived as too emotional.
Yeah, and the temptation is to shut down that emotions, but that's your superpower. Don't do that.
Right. To compromise. Women usually up the very serious, very data, and then they become seen as, like what you're saying, like too much as, I don't know what the word would be. Would you use aggressive maybe?
Well, it's kind of like the difference between assertive and aggressive.
Yes.
And that's kind of like, ultimately we know where the line is, but it's about perception. And it was one of those things where it took me a while to recognize, because I had not really seen that difference when I was more junior. And apparently it's normal, because when you're more junior and you're in a position of power, you're an exception and people kind of like it because it's like, oh, it's odd and how cute.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then when you get to the position where there's real power or there's real perceived power, that's when the imbalance starts to happen.
Interesting. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure people listening can really identify, particularly people that are women that are trying to rise and be successful and looking to you for.
And you see it when I mentor women. You see that, for instance, during job interviews or when I mentor a few students from my alma maters. And you see that when women go to a job interview and they want to be seen as, look, I'm transitioning into this new role. I finished my MBA. Now I want to show up like super professional. You tend to shut out your nice side.
Yeah.
Just to show up like super professional, super polished. But they forget that when you go to a job interview, the hiring manager is actually trying to find a connection. So you need to have that nice human connective side open. Otherwise, no matter how shiny and nice and everything is, if that connection didn't happen, you probably will go with another candidate that was more personable. And it's feedback that you rarely give women. And that's one of the things that I find is that for younger women in particular, and especially in tech, you don't get enough feedback and you don't get enough good quality feedback that you can action. So seek out feedback. That is my thing. If you're a woman in tech, ask for feedback all the time.
Coming to the end, this last question, I always close with this. I call it the undeniable take. So what is one truth you'd give to the woman who is really ready to lead in a very senior role, but she's still being underestimated? So in other words, she knows she's got it, but needs help in cracking the code, as you have obviously done. What would you tell her?
So I think in tech, very often people think that the technology and being competent gets you in the room. What keeps you in the room is the dollars. So be as comfortable with the commercials and the revenue side of the job as you are with the technology. So very often that's the real difference. When you see the leadership, is like being able to engage and understand what makes money in whatever role that you are, get as close to the revenue generation.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's fantastic. Mic drop. Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for being with us today. And that will close us up for this episode. Thanks for joining. For more unfiltered advice and tools that drive real business value, subscribe to our newsletter, connect on LinkedIn, or book a consult, because leadership development fails when we solve the wrong problems. Find all links below.